Hell's angel fed his homeless ex. Weeks later, she returned with a secret. The morning sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Jack's porter walked his familiar route. His heavy work boots clicked against the sidewalk, each step measured and purposeful. At 42, he'd found a rhythm to life that suited him, running his auto repair shop, keeping to himself, and enjoying the simple things. The sleeve of his leather jacket rode up, revealing the faded tattoos that marked his past life. He absently tugged it back down, a habit born from years of trying to blend into normal society. The small town had eventually accepted him, but old habits died hard. Birds darted between the trees lining the street, their cheerful songs a contrast to the rumbling engines he worked with all day. A gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh-baked bread from Miller's bakery, mixing with the crisp autumn air. These peaceful moments reminded Jax how far he'd come from his days running with the motorcycle gang. The bell above Joe's diner chimed as he pushed open the door. The familiar scents of coffee and grilled onions wrapped around him like an old friend. He nodded to Joe behind the counter, heading for his usual spot by the window. That's when he saw her. Marie. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now, back to the story. His steps faltered, his breath catching in his throat. For a moment, he thought he was seeing things, some trick of the light or his imagination playing cruel games. But no, it was definitely her. His ex-wife sat hunched in the corner booth, her fingers wrapped around an empty coffee cup. She looked nothing like the woman he remembered. Her once vibrant brown hair hung in limp, unwashed strands around her gaunt face. The clothes she wore were dirty and worn thin, hanging loose on her frame. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, making them appear sunken and hollow. Jax's chest tightened. 7 years had passed since their divorce, since the day she'd walked away without a backward glance. They'd both been different people then, him still wrestling with his violent past, her battling demons of her own. Their love hadn't been enough to save them from themselves. But seeing her like this, it shook him to his core. Marie's eyes lifted, meeting his across the diner. Recognition flickered across her face, followed quickly by shame. She seemed to shrink further into herself, her shoulders hunching as if she could disappear into the vinyl booth. Without conscious thought, Jax found himself moving toward her table. His mind raced with questions. What had happened to her? How had she ended up here, in this state? The Marie he'd known had been proud, almost to a fault. This woman before him seemed broken in ways he couldn't comprehend. He stopped at her table, his shadow falling across the scratched Formica surface. Up close, the signs of hardship were even more apparent. The slight tremor in her hands, the way her clothes hung on her frame, the faint smell of unwashed fabric. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The usual diner sounds faded into background noise, the clink of silverware, the murmur of conversations, the sizzle from the grill. Time seemed suspended between them, heavy with unspoken words and shared history. Finally, Marie lifted her face to his. Her eyes, once bright with life and laughter, now held a deep weariness. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. I didn't know where else to go. Jax's jaw clenched, his heart aching at the defeat in her tone. Without hesitation, he slid into the booth across from her and caught Joe's eye, signaling for service. The tension between them was thick enough to cut with a knife, but he couldn't walk away. Not when she looked like this. Not when she needed help. Joe placed a steaming plate of meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and green beans in front of Marie. The aroma of home-cooked food filled the space between them, but Marie just stared at it, her hands twisting in her lap. Jax watched as she slowly picked up her fork, her fingers trembling slightly. "Eat," he said softly, his gruff voice gentler than usual. "It's okay." Marie took a small bite, then another, as if afraid the food might disappear. Each careful movement spoke of someone who hadn't had a proper meal in far too long. Jax's stomach knotted as he watched her, remembering how she used to cook elaborate Sunday dinners in their little kitchen, humming while she worked. "How long?" he asked, keeping his voice low to avoid drawing attention from the other diners. Marie paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. She set it down carefully, still not meeting his eyes. "A few months now," she admitted. "Lost my job at the grocery store when they downsized. Couldn't make rent after that." Jax's hands clenched under the table. The thought of Marie sleeping on the streets, vulnerable and alone, made his blood boil. But he kept his face neutral, knowing his anger would only make her retreat further. "Why? Didn't you reach out to someone?" "To me?" She pushed a green bean around her plate. "Proud, I guess. Stupid proud." A bitter laugh escaped her. "Thought I could figure it out on my own. Then winter started coming and—" She shrugged, the gesture small and defeated. "There are shelters," Jax said, trying to keep the accusation out of his voice. "They're full most nights, and some—" She shuddered slightly. "Some aren't safe, especially for women alone." The implications of that statement hit Jax like a physical blow. He'd seen enough of the world's darker side to know exactly what she meant. His protective instincts, never quite dormant when it came to Marie, surged to life. "Have you been—" He couldn't finish the question. "No," she said quickly, finally looking up at him. "No, nothing like that. I've been careful. Found safe spots to sleep. Behind the church sometimes, or in the park when it's warm enough." Jax rubbed his face roughly, fighting back a wave of emotion. The park, he'd driven past it countless times these last few months, never knowing Marie was there, homeless and struggling. She went back to eating, taking small, measured bites as if to make the food last. The diner's fluorescent lights highlighted the sharp angles of her cheekbones, the dark circles under her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered suddenly, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I didn't want to bother you. I didn't know how to ask for anything." Jax watched her for a long moment, wrestling with the complicated mix of emotions churning inside him. Anger at the situation, guilt for not knowing sooner, and an overwhelming need to protect her, despite their past. "You don't have to ask," he said finally, his voice rough with feeling. "Stay with me tonight." Marie's head snapped up, surprise and uncertainty warring on her face. She opened her mouth, likely to refuse, but Jax could see the exhaustion in every line of her body. After a long moment, she nodded, accepting his offer with the same quiet grace she'd shown in accepting the meal. The evening air had grown chilly as Jax guided Marie to his pickup truck. The old Ford's engine rumbled to life, its familiar sound filling the awkward silence between them. Marie sat stiffly in the passenger seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap, looking smaller than he remembered. Streetlights cast shifting shadows across her face as they drove through town. Jax gripped the steering wheel tighter, memories flooding back with each passing block. There was the park where they used to have picnics on Sunday afternoons, the movie theater where they had their first date, the church where they'd made their vows, promising forever. 7 years felt like both yesterday and a lifetime ago. Marie's quiet voice broke through his thoughts. "Your truck still makes that clicking sound." Jax nodded, surprised she remembered. "Yeah. Never did figure out what causes it." "You used to say it gave the old girl character." A ghost of a smile. crossed his face. Still does. They fell back into silence as the truck climbed the winding road leading to his house. The last time they'd spoken, angry words had filled the air between them. He'd called her selfish. She'd called him controlling. They'd both said things they couldn't take back. Now, watching her from the corner of his eye, all that anger felt distant and hollow. Her clothes hung loose on her frame, and her hair, once so carefully styled, was dull and tangled. What had happened to the fierce, proud woman he'd known? The truck's headlights swept across the front of his modest two-story house. It wasn't much, but he'd worked hard for it after leaving his old life behind. The garage where he now ran his business sat off to the side, tools and parts neatly organized inside. "You've done well for yourself," Marie said softly as they pulled into the driveway. "I get by." Jax killed the engine, and the silence felt heavier than before. "Come on, let's get you settled." He led her up the porch steps, fumbling slightly with his keys in the dark. The house smelled of coffee and motor oil. Bachelor living at its finest. Marie stood in the entryway, clutching her worn backpack to her chest like a shield. "Guest room's upstairs," Jax said, flicking on lights as they went. "Bathroom's right across the hall." The guest room was simple but clean, with a double bed and a dresser. He'd never quite gotten around to decorating it. Marie set her backpack down carefully, as if afraid to disturb anything. Jax cleared his throat. "Let me get you some things." He disappeared into the hallway, returning with a fluffy towel and his warmest blanket. "Water pressure's decent in the shower. Hot water takes a minute to kick in." Marie accepted the items, her fingers brushing his for a brief moment. Jax looked away, unable to meet her eyes. The weight of their shared history, their mistakes, their regrets. It all felt too heavy in this small room. "I'll sleep on the couch," he said, already backing toward the door. Marie nodded, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. No more words were needed. They both had enough to think about. The morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Jax's back ached from a night on the couch, but the familiar aroma of coffee pulled him from his restless sleep. For a moment, he forgot about his unexpected houseguest, until he walked into the kitchen and saw Marie sitting at his table. She'd cleaned up some, her face freshly washed and her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. The morning light revealed the deep hollows in her cheeks and the dark circles under her eyes that even soap and water couldn't hide. Her hands were wrapped around one of his old coffee mugs, the blue one with a chip on the rim. "Hope you don't mind," she said softly. "I remembered where you kept the coffee." "Course not." Jax grabbed a mug from the cabinet, trying to ignore how strange it felt to have her in his kitchen again. "You always did make it stronger than me." A tiny smile flickered across her face. "Some things don't change, I guess." The coffee maker gurgled its last few drops as Jax poured himself a cup. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the gentle ticking of the wall clock and the distant sound of birds outside. "Weather's supposed to be nice today," Marie offered, her voice tentative. "Yeah, good day for working on cars." Jax leaned against the counter, not quite ready to join her at the table. "Got a Chevy coming in later. Still fixing up old classics? When I can get 'em." He took a long sip of coffee. "Pays better than it used to be." Marie nodded, her fingers tracing the chip in her mug. "I always loved watching you work. You had such patience with those old engines." The memory hung between them. Summer afternoons spent in their old garage, Marie bringing him cold beers while he tinkered under various hoods. Back when things were simpler. Back before it all fell apart. After a quiet breakfast of toast and eggs, they moved to the living room. Marie perched on the edge of the couch while Jax settled into his favorite armchair. Sunlight caught the dust motes floating between them, making them dance like tiny stars. "Remember how we met?" Marie asked suddenly. "At that awful dive bar?" "The rusty nail," Jax said, remembering. "You were wearing that red dress. And you were trying so hard not to look like a tough guy." She smiled faintly. "But I saw right through you." "Yeah, you did." Those first years had been good. Road trips on his bike, lazy Sundays in bed, planning their future together. Before the fighting started. Before the silence grew too loud to bear. "We were happy once," Marie said quietly, her eyes fixed on her hands. "Before everything." Jax remembered the screaming matches, the slammed doors, the nights spent sleeping in separate rooms. The way they'd slowly poisoned what they'd built together until there was nothing left but bitterness and blame. "I know you didn't expect to see me again," Marie whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I never thought I'd end up like this." Jax didn't know what to say to that. What could he say? So he just nodded, watching the dust motes continue their endless dance in the morning light. The next few days settled into an awkward rhythm. Jax found himself tiptoeing around his own house, trying to give Marie space while also keeping an eye on her. Every morning, he'd wake up to find her already in the kitchen, coffee made, staring out the window like she was searching for answers in the dawn light. "I found a good shelter downtown," Jax said one morning, sliding a newspaper across the kitchen table. "They've got programs to help people get back on their feet, job training and stuff." Marie's fingers tightened around her coffee mug. "I appreciate it, Jax, but I can't go back to those places." Her voice was quiet but firm. "The noise, the desperation, I just can't." Jax ran a hand through his beard, frustrated. "You need something more permanent than my couch, Marie. Some kind of plan." "I know." She wouldn't meet his eyes. "I just need time to figure things out." Later that day, Jax found Marie cleaning the kitchen, scrubbing at spots that weren't there. Her movements were frantic, almost desperate. "You don't have to do that," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "I have to do something." She didn't stop scrubbing. "I can't just exist here, taking up space." "Marie." His voice was gentle but firm. "Stop." Her hand stilled, but she kept her back to him. "I shouldn't be here, Jax. This isn't right." "You're welcome here," he said simply. "For as long as you need." She finally turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Why are you being so kind to me? After everything?" Jax shrugged, uncomfortable with the question. "Because it's the right thing to do." The days blurred together. Jax went to work at his garage, trying to focus on engines and carburetors instead of worrying about Marie. She spent her days cleaning his house, doing laundry, cooking meals he hadn't asked for but appreciated all the same. It was like living with a ghost of their former life together. One evening, Jax sat in his living room, mindlessly watching a basketball game. The familiar sounds of squeaking sneakers and bouncing balls filled the room, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He was thinking about Marie, about how different she was from the woman he'd married. She seemed smaller somehow, not just physically but in spirit. Like life had worn away at her edges until there wasn't much left. He heard her soft footsteps before he saw her. When she appeared in the doorway, he had to do a double take. She'd showered and changed into clean clothes he'd bought her earlier that week. Her hair was neatly combed, and though she was still too thin, she looked more like the Marie he remembered. She crossed the room slowly, almost hesitantly, and sat down next to him on the couch. The TV droned on, but neither of them was watching it anymore. Marie studied his face intently, her expression unreadable. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, she took a deep breath. "I have something to tell you. Something I should have told you years ago." Jax turned to look at her, his brow furrowed in confusion. He'd never seen her look so serious, so afraid. What could be worse than everything they'd already been through? Marie twisted her hands in her lap, her knuckles white with tension. The basketball game continued to play in the background, but the sound seemed distant now, like it was coming from another world. She stared straight ahead, gathering her courage. "When we split up," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I was carrying something more than just my belongings when I walked out that door." She paused, swallowing hard. "I was carrying our child." The words hung in the air between them. Jax sat perfectly still, as if moving might shatter this moment into 1,000 pieces. "I found out just days before everything fell apart," Marie continued, her words coming faster now, like a dam breaking. "I was going to tell you, but then the fights got worse, and you were so angry about everything, and I—" She drew in a shaky breath. "I was scared. Scared of what you might say, scared of how it would change things." Jax's hands gripped the armrest of the couch, his knuckles matching Marie's in their whiteness. The TV's blue light flickered across his face, highlighting the shock etched in every line. "After I left, I tried to find you," Marie said, her voice cracking. "But you'd already moved, changed your number. The guys at your old shop wouldn't tell me anything. Maybe they were trying to protect you. I don't know." She wiped at her eyes with trembling fingers. "By then, I was showing, and I was too proud, too stubborn to keep looking. I convinced myself it was better this way." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant cheers from the TV. Marie's shoulders hunched forward, as if bearing an invisible weight. "I raised him alone," she continued, her voice thick with emotion. "He's such a good boy, Jax. Smart, kind. He has your eyes, your smile." She wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to hold herself together. "He's 7 now. 7 years I've kept this secret, carrying it like a stone in my heart." Jax hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. His breathing was shallow, his face a mask of disbelief and growing comprehension. "I know I had no right to keep this from you," Marie said, the words tumbling out now. "I know it was wrong, but I was young and scared. And then as time went on, it just got harder and harder to find the right moment, the right words." She turned to face him fully, her eyes pleading. "When things got really bad for us, when we ended up on the streets, that's when I knew I had to find you. Not just for me, but for him. He deserves better than what I could give him alone." The room felt too small suddenly, too close. The walls seemed to press in as the weight of Marie's revelation settled over them both. Jax's world had tilted on its axis, everything he thought he knew about his life rearranging itself around this new, earth-shattering fact. He stared down at his hands, rough and calloused from years of mechanical work. These were a father's hands, he realized, and had been for 7 years without his knowledge. His heart thundered in his chest, each beat seeming to echo the words. "A son, a son, a son. I have a son?" The words came out as barely more than a whisper, filled with wonder and disbelief. Marie nodded, tears spilling over onto her cheeks, unable to speak. Jax paced the living room floor, his boots making heavy thuds against the hardwood. His mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, each fighting for attention. 7 years. He'd been a father for 7 years without knowing it. The weight of lost time pressed down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. "I need to see him," he said suddenly, stopping his pacing. His voice was gruff with emotion. "Now. Today." Marie wrung her hands together, her face a mix of worry and understanding. "He's at the park with Mrs. Henderson, our neighbor who watches him sometimes. It's just 3 blocks from here." Jax grabbed his leather jacket from the hook by the door, his movements urgent but unsure. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled it on. "Take me to him," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. The walk to the park felt like the longest 3 blocks of Jax's life. Each step brought him closer to meeting his son, a child he hadn't known existed until minutes ago. The spring air was crisp, but he barely noticed it through the thunder of his heartbeat in his ears. Marie walked beside him in silence, occasionally glancing his way as if checking that he wasn't about to bolt. Her steps were quick, trying to keep up with his longer stride. "What's his name?" Jax asked suddenly, realizing he didn't even know this basic fact about his own child. "Tommy," Marie replied softly. "Thomas James Porter." Jax's throat tightened. James had been his father's name. Even without knowing him, Marie had given their son a piece of his family's history. The park came into view, a modest playground with swings, a slide, and a sandbox. A few children played, while parents watched from nearby benches. Marie pointed to a small figure wearing a blue jacket, building something in the sandbox. "That's him," she whispered. Jax stopped walking, frozen in place. The boy had dark hair like his, falling slightly into his eyes as he concentrated on his task. His small hands carefully packed sand into a plastic bucket, his face scrunched up in concentration. "He likes to build things," Marie said quietly. "Always taking things apart and putting them back, together, just like his daddy." The words hit Jax like a physical blow. Daddy. He was a daddy, had been for 7 years without knowing it. Taking a deep breath, he started walking again, his legs feeling like lead. Each step brought more details into focus. The way the boy's nose crinkled when he smiled, the determined set of his jaw as he worked. Jax saw echoes of himself in every gesture, every movement. An elderly woman, Mrs. Henderson, Jax assumed, sat on a nearby bench, watching Tommy play. She noticed Marie and gave a friendly wave, then looked curiously at Jax. Tommy looked up at the movement, his eyes finding his mother first, then shifting to Jax. Those eyes. Jax felt his breath catch. They were his eyes, the same shade of deep brown that looked back at him from every mirror. His heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst, Jax slowly lowered himself to one knee, bringing himself to Tommy's level. The boy watched him with open curiosity, his head tilted slightly to one side. "Hey there, little man," Jax managed to say, his voice gentle despite its roughness. His hands trembled where they rested on his knee. Tommy studied him for a long moment, his eyes serious and searching. Then, slowly, a shy smile spread across his face, lighting up his features in a way that made Jax's heart clench with love he didn't know he was capable of feeling. The spring days stretched longer as Jax learned what it meant to be a father. Each morning brought new challenges and small victories that made his heart swell. He'd wake up early, his mind already racing with plans for the day ahead, ways to connect with Tommy, to bridge the gap that 7 years had created. At the park, Jax watched Tommy's face light up as he taught him how to throw a baseball. The boy's first attempts went wild, the ball sailing far from its intended target, but Jax's encouragement never wavered. "That's it, buddy. Keep your eye on where you want it to go," Jax said, demonstrating the motion. Again. His large hands dwarfed the baseball, but he moved with careful gentleness. Tommy's tongue poked out in concentration as he mimicked his father's stance. There were moments of uncertainty, too, like when Tommy skinned his knee on the playground and Jax froze, not knowing whether to scoop him up or let him tough it out. Marie had stepped in then, showing him how to clean the wound and distract Tommy with silly faces until the tears stopped. "You're doing fine," she'd whispered to Jax later. "Nobody knows what they're doing at first." In his garage, Jax found another way to connect. Tommy was fascinated by the tools and machines, just as Marie had said. Jax showed him how to sort different-sized wrenches, making a game of it. The boy's small hands carefully arranged them from biggest to smallest, his face serious with concentration. "This one's like you, Daddy," Tommy said one day, holding up the biggest wrench. "And this little one's like me." The word Daddy still caught Jax, off guard every time, sending a warm flutter through his chest. Some days were harder than others. Tommy had tantrums, like any child, and Jax struggled to know how to handle them. He'd look to Marie, panic in his eyes, and she'd guide him through it with patient understanding. But tonight, after a particularly good day at the park where Tommy had finally managed to catch the ball 3 times in a row, Jax felt like maybe he was getting the hang of this father thing. He helped Tommy brush his teeth, smiling at how the boy insisted on doing it himself first, before letting Jax help with the spots he missed. "Story?" Tommy asked hopefully, already climbing into bed with his favorite book clutched to his chest. "One story," Jax agreed, settling into the small chair beside Tommy's bed. His voice, usually so gruff, softened as he read about adventures with talking animals and brave little engineers. Tommy's eyes grew heavy, his responses to the story becoming slower until they stopped, altogether. Jax carefully marked their place in the book and pulled the covers up to Tommy's chin. The boy shifted slightly but didn't wake, his face peaceful in sleep. Standing in the doorway, Jax watched his son's chest rise and fall with each breath. The nightlight cast a soft glow across Tommy's features, highlighting how much he looked like Jax himself at that age. Love squeezed Jax's heart, while fear whispered doubts in his ear about all the ways he could mess this up. "What have I gotten myself into?" he whispered into the quiet room, but there was a tenderness in his voice that betrayed the joy beneath his uncertainty. Each day revealed new facets of Tommy's personality that made Jax's heart grow fuller. During breakfast, Tommy arranged his cereal in perfect circles before eating them, his small face scrunched in concentration. At the park, he always shared his toys with other kids, even his favorite red truck that Jax had given him. In the garage, Tommy's curiosity bloomed. He'd point at different tools, asking, "What's that?" with endless enthusiasm. Jax would explain each one patiently, amazed at how quickly the boy absorbed everything. Sometimes Tommy would mimic Jax's movements, holding a plastic wrench while Jax worked on cars, trying to copy his father's serious expression. "Look, Daddy," Tommy would call out, showing off his pretend repairs. "I fixed it just like you." These moments filled Jax with a pride he'd never known before. But late at night, when the house was quiet, doubt would creep in. He'd think about his past, the violence, the anger, the mistakes. How could someone like him be worthy of this pure, innocent child? The weight of responsibility pressed heavy on his shoulders. Marie noticed everything from her careful distance. She'd watch them play together, her eyes soft with gratitude when Tommy laughed at Jax's silly faces, or when Jax taught him how to tie his shoes. But there was tension in her shoulders, worry lines around her eyes. That deepened when she thought no one was looking. One afternoon, Tommy showed Jax a drawing he'd made at preschool, 3 stick figures holding hands. "That's you," he pointed proudly. "And that's Mommy, and that's me." Jax had to turn away quickly, his eyes burning with unexpected tears. The days fell into a rhythm. Breakfast together, work for Jax while Tommy was at preschool, afternoons filled with games and learning. But questions lingered in the spaces between their shared moments. How had Marie managed alone all these years? What hardships had she faced that Jax couldn't even imagine? That night, after Tommy was tucked in with his favorite stuffed dinosaur, Jax and Marie sat in the living room. The TV hummed quietly in the background, neither really watching it. Marie's hands twisted in her lap, her voice barely above a whisper when she finally spoke. "I'm so sorry, Jax," she said, tears gathering in her eyes. "I should have told you about him. I was just so scared." Her voice cracked. "The shelters were awful. Sometimes we'd sleep in my car, and I'd tell him it was camping to make it seem fun. I worked whatever jobs I could find, but it was never enough." She wiped her eyes with trembling fingers. "I'd see him watching other kids with their dads at the park, and it broke my heart. But I convinced myself you wouldn't want us, that we'd just be a burden." Jax listened, his throat tight with emotion. The thought of Tommy and Marie struggling alone, sleeping in cars and shelters while he'd been building his comfortable life, hit him like a physical blow. "I'm here now," he said, his voice raw with feeling. "We'll figure this out together." The early morning sun filtered through the kitchen window as Jax watched Tommy push his scrambled eggs around his plate. The boy's shoulders hunched forward, his eyes downcast, barely touching his breakfast. Jax had tried making silly shapes with the food, hoping to get even a small smile. But Tommy remained, withdrawn. "Hey, buddy, how about we work on the Chevy together today?" Jax offered, trying to keep his voice light. "You could be my special assistant." Tommy just shrugged, his fork scraping against the plate. "I guess." Marie stood at the sink, washing dishes with more force than necessary. Her reflection in the window showed the worry lines creasing her forehead. She turned, giving Jax a helpless look that mirrored his own frustration. In the garage later that morning, Jax tried showing Tommy how to check the oil level. The boy stood back, arms crossed, barely looking at what Jax was doing. Every attempt at conversation was met with one-word answers or silence. "Remember how you used to love pretending to fix things?" Jax asked, his voice strained with forced cheerfulness. "You were such a great helper." Tommy kicked at some loose gravel on the garage floor. "That was before." The words hit Jax like a punch to the gut. Before what? Before they really knew each other? Before the truth came out? He wanted to ask, but feared pushing too hard would only make Tommy retreat further. Marie watched from the doorway, wringing her hands. "Maybe he's just tired," she suggested weakly. "It's been a lot of change." But Jax could see the guilt in her eyes, the way she blamed herself for Tommy's withdrawal. She'd step forward to help, then step back, unsure of her place in this delicate dance between father and son. That afternoon, Jax tried again with a game of catch in the backyard. The ball sailed past Tommy repeatedly as he stood, barely attempting to catch it. Each missed catch felt like another wall building between them. "It's okay, buddy," Jax said, picking up the ball for the 10th time. "We can try something else." Tommy's lower lip trembled slightly. "I want to go inside." Jax ran his hand through his hair, fighting back his frustration. He'd faced down rival gangs without flinching, but this small boy's rejection cut deeper than any knife ever could. Inside, Marie was preparing dinner, the rhythmic chopping of vegetables unable to mask the tension in the house. "Give him time," she whispered as Jax passed. "He's scared too." The evening stretched on endlessly. Jax escaped to the back porch, slumping into an old wooden chair. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, but he barely noticed. All he could think about were the walls between him and his son. Walls he didn't know how to break down. He heard the screen door creak open behind him. Small footsteps approached cautiously. Tommy stood there, a piece of paper clutched in his hands, shifting from foot to foot. "I made this," Tommy said quietly, holding out the drawing. Jax took it carefully. On the paper were two figures, one tall with a beard, one small, holding hands. They were standing in front of what looked like the garage, surrounded by roughly drawn tools. Something warm and unexpected spread through Jax's chest. A tear slipped down his cheek before he could stop it. "That's pretty great, kid," he managed to say. Tommy's face lit up with a smile, real and bright, for the first time in days. The tension in the house grew thicker with each passing day. Marie spent more time alone in her room, and when she did emerge, her smile seemed forced. Jax noticed how she'd flinch slightly whenever he entered a room, as if his very presence made her uncomfortable. One morning, while Tommy was absorbed in his coloring books at the kitchen table, Jax found Marie staring out the living room window, arms wrapped tightly around herself. "We need to talk about this," Jax said, keeping his voice low. "You've been avoiding me for days." Marie's shoulders tensed. "I'm not avoiding you, I just—" She trailed off, still not turning to face him. "You just what?" Jax stepped closer, frustration creeping into his voice. "One minute we're trying to be a family, the next you're acting like I'm a stranger." "Maybe that's what we are," Marie whispered, finally turning around. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "Strangers, it's been 7 years, Jax. We can't just pick up where we left off." "I'm not trying to pick up where we left off," Jax said, running a hand through his hair. "I'm trying to build something new, for Tommy's sake, at least." "For Tommy's sake," Marie repeated, her voice bitter. "That's the only reason we're doing this, isn't it? Because of Tommy?" "That's not fair," Jax growled, his temper rising. "I've been nothing but supportive since you showed up. I've given you a place to stay. I'm trying to be a father to our son." "A father?" Marie's voice rose sharply. "You've been a father for what, a few weeks? I've been there for him his entire life, through everything." "Because you chose that," Jax shot back, his control slipping. "You chose to keep him from me. You don't get to throw that in my face now." Tommy's crayon clattered to the floor in the kitchen, the sound making them both freeze. They'd forgotten how easily sound carried in the small house. "This was a mistake," Marie said, her voice shaking. "I shouldn't have come here. I shouldn't have—" She pressed her hands to her face, shoulders trembling. "Marie?" Jax's voice softened, reaching for her. "Don't—" She jerked away from his touch. "No, Jax, this isn't working. We can't force this. We can't pretend the past didn't happen." "So what? You're just going to run away again?" Jax's words came out harsher than he intended. "I'm not running," Marie snapped, but she was already moving toward the door, grabbing her jacket. "I just need space. I need to think." "Marie, wait," Jax started, but she was already yanking the door open. "I can't do this right now," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry." The door slammed behind her, leaving the house in sudden, suffocating silence. Jax stood frozen, staring at the closed door, his heart pounding in his chest. The soft pad of footsteps made him turn. Tommy stood in the doorway between the kitchen and living room, his eyes wide and uncertain. Jax slumped onto the couch, feeling the weight of failure pressing down on him. "What do we do now?" he asked, more to himself than to Tommy. The boy just shrugged his small shoulders and quietly returned to his drawing, leaving Jax alone with his churning thoughts. 3 days had passed since Marie walked out, each one feeling longer than the last. Jax threw himself into caring for Tommy, trying to fill the void with trips to the park, bedtime stories, and careful attention to the boy's needs. but her absence hung heavy in the air, like a storm cloud refusing to break. Tommy had grown quieter, if that was possible. He'd taken to sitting by the window after dinner, his small fingers tracing patterns on the glass, as if hoping his mother would materialize on the street below. Jax's heart ached watching him, knowing there wasn't much he could say to make it better. The routine they'd built felt hollow now. Jax would make breakfast, pack Tommy's lunch for daycare, pick him up in the afternoon, and try to keep things normal. But the empty chair at the dinner table seemed to mock their attempts at normalcy. That evening, Jax was helping Tommy with a puzzle on the living room floor. The pieces scattered between them showed half of a fire truck, Tommy's latest obsession. The boy had barely spoken all day, but his face was screwed up in concentration as he tried to fit pieces together. "Here, buddy," Jax said softly, handing him a red piece. "I think this one goes there." Tommy took it without a word, his small fingers working to connect it to the others. The ticking of the wall clock seemed unusually loud in the quiet room. A knock at the door made them both jump. Tommy's head snapped up, his eyes wide with hope. Jax's heart started hammering in his chest. He knew that knock, gentle but deliberate. "Stay here, okay?" Jax said, ruffling Tommy's hair as he stood up. His legs felt unsteady as he walked to the door. When he opened it, Marie stood there, illuminated by the porch light. She looked different from when she'd left. Not better or worse, just different. Her eyes were clearer, though tinged with exhaustion. She'd pulled her hair back neatly, and her clothes were fresh, but there was something vulnerable in the way she held herself. "Hi," she said softly, her hands fidgeting with the strap of her purse. "Hi," Jax replied, his voice rough with emotion. They stood there for a moment, the weight of 3 days' silence between them. From inside, they could hear Tommy's shuffling movements with the puzzle pieces. "Can I?" Marie gestured vaguely toward the door. "Of course." Jax stepped back, holding the door wider. "Of course you can come in." Marie stepped inside, and the familiar scent of her shampoo, something floral and clean, drifted past him. She paused in the entryway, taking in the sight of Tommy's shoes lined up neatly by the door, his jacket hanging on the lowest hook. She turned to face Jax, and he could see the tears gathering in her eyes. Her lips trembled slightly as she drew in a deep breath. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wasn't ready to face everything, but I'm here now. We can do this together." Jax felt something tight in his chest begin to loosen. He nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat, but feeling the first real glimmer of hope he'd had in days. The first few days after Marie's return felt like walking on eggshells. Everyone moved carefully around each other, speaking in soft voices, afraid to disturb the fragile peace they'd found. But slowly, like ice melting in spring, the tension began to thaw. Marie started making breakfast again, filling the kitchen with the smell of coffee and pancakes. Tommy would shuffle in, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and climb onto his chair without a word. But his eyes would light up when she placed a plate in front of him, decorated with chocolate chip, smiley faces just like she used to make. Jax found himself watching her when she wasn't looking, the way she hummed while folding laundry, how she'd absent-mindedly tuck her hair behind her ear while reading Tommy a bedtime story. These little moments reminded him of their early days together, before everything fell apart. The counseling sessions were Dr. Anderson's idea. "Family healing takes time," she'd said during their first meeting, her kind eyes moving between the three of them. "But it also takes work." They went twice a week, sitting on the comfortable couch in her office. Tommy would usually play with the toys in the corner while they talked. Sometimes he'd join them, offering his own perspective with the simple honesty only children possess. Marie spoke about her struggles with depression, how it had torn their marriage apart. Jax opened up about his anger and guilt, about feeling like he should have done more to help her. They talked about the years apart, about Tommy, about second chances. Some sessions left them emotionally drained. Others filled them with hope. They learned to listen without judgment, to speak without accusation. Tommy started drawing pictures of all three of them together, stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. After a particularly intense session, where they discussed their fears for the future, they sat on the front porch of their home. The evening air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of approaching autumn. Marie's hand found Jax's, their fingers intertwining naturally, like they'd never forgotten how to fit together. Tommy came outside, clutching his favorite stuffed dinosaur. Without hesitation, he squeezed himself between them on the porch step. Marie shifted to make room, and Jax wrapped an arm around both of them. They sat there quietly, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and orange. Tommy leaned his head against Jax's side, his small body warm and trusting. Marie's thumb traced gentle circles on Jax's palm, a gesture so familiar it made his heart ache. Looking at his small family, Jax felt something settle in his chest. Not quite peace, but something close to it. "We're not perfect," he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "But we're trying." Marie turned to him, her eyes shining with unshed tears and understanding. She nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. In that moment, with Tommy between them and the sky turning purple above, it felt like enough. The morning dawned bright and clear, perfect for a family day out. Jax had called the auto shop the night before, telling them he needed a personal day. After years of working non-stop, he finally had something more important than engines and oil changes. Marie packed sandwiches and fruit into a wicker basket, while Tommy bounced around the kitchen, unable to contain his excitement. "Can we fly my kite?" he asked, tugging at Jax's sleeve. "The blue one?" "Sure can, buddy," Jax replied, ruffling the boy's hair. It still amazed him how natural these moments felt now, how easily Tommy had accepted him into his life. The boy's trust was a gift he never thought he'd receive. They drove to Riverside Park with the windows down, letting the spring breeze fill the car. Tommy sat in the back, clutching his kite and chattering about the clouds. Marie reached over and squeezed Jax's hand, her touch warm and familiar. The park was quiet for a Wednesday afternoon. A few other families dotted the green space, but they found a perfect spot under an old oak tree. Marie spread out the checkered blanket while Jax helped Tommy with his kite. "Hold it up high," Jax instructed, showing Tommy how to grip the string. "Now run! Run as fast as you can!" Tommy took off across the grass, his small legs pumping, the kite trailing behind him. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a gust of wind caught the blue fabric, lifting it skyward. "I did it!" Tommy shouted, his face glowing with pride. "Dad, look! I did it!" The word Dad hit Jax like a physical force. Tommy had never called him that before. He glanced at Marie, who was watching them with tears in her eyes. She nodded, understanding the significance of the moment. They spent hours in the park. Tommy ran himself breathless with the kite, then settled down for lunch. Marie had packed all his favorites, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches cut into triangles, apple slices, and chocolate chip cookies she'd baked that morning. After lunch, Jax taught Tommy how to throw a frisbee. The boy wasn't very good at catching it yet, but his determination was touching. Every time he missed, he'd laugh and try again, his enthusiasm never wavering. Marie joined them, and soon they were playing a game of keep-away, their laughter echoing across the park. Jax couldn't remember the last time he'd felt so light, so free. The weight of his past, The years of loneliness and regret seemed to fade away in the afternoon sun. As the eighth day drew to a close, they settled back on the blanket. The sky was turning orange and pink, the sun sinking behind the trees. Tommy had found a patch of dandelions nearby and was carefully picking them, creating a makeshift bouquet. Jax watched his son, playing in the fading light. The boy's face was smudged with dirt, his clothes grass-stained, but he looked completely content. Marie sat close to Jax, her head resting against his shoulder. Without thinking, Jax wrapped his arm around her, pulling her closer. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Tommy play. The moment felt perfect, like a photograph he wanted to keep forever. "This is what I always wanted," Jax said softly, his voice thick with emotion. Marie looked up at him, tears glistening in her eyes. "Me too," she replied. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, its official letterhead stark against the white envelope. Marie's hands trembled as she read it, her face growing paler with each line. Jax was in the garage, tinkering with his motorcycle, when he heard the sound of breaking glass. He rushed into the kitchen to find Marie standing amid the shattered remains of her coffee mug, the letter clutched in her shaking hands. "Marie?" he asked, carefully stepping around the mess. "What's wrong?" She couldn't speak, just handed him the paper. Jax's eyes scanned the formal text, his jaw tightening with each word. The state was questioning Marie's fitness as a mother due to her previous homeless status. They were investigating whether Tommy should be placed in foster care. "This is ridiculous," Jax growled, crumpling the letter in his fist. "They can't do this. You're his mother." Marie sank into a kitchen chair, her face buried in her hands. "They can, and they will," she whispered. "My past. It's coming back to haunt us. I knew this would happen someday." Jax knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. They were cold, and he could feel them trembling. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "You're not alone anymore. We're going to fight this together." "How?" Marie's voice cracked. "I lived on the streets, Jax. I couldn't provide for him. They'll use that against me." "That was then," Jax insisted. "Look at now. Tommy has a home, he's well-fed, he's happy, he's got both his parents." He stood up, pacing the kitchen floor. "We'll get a lawyer, a good one. I've got savings." Marie watched him move, her eyes following his determined stride. "The hearing is in 3 weeks," she said softly. "They'll investigate everything, our past, our relationship, our home." "Let them," Jax replied, his voice steady despite the anger burning in his chest. "We've got nothing to hide. We're doing our best for Tommy." They spent the next hour at the kitchen table, Marie explaining everything she knew about custody laws from her time in shelters. Jax took notes, his handwriting messy but determined. They needed character witnesses, proof of income, documentation of Tommy's well-being. "What about the counseling sessions?" Jax suggested. "That shows we're working on being better parents, right?" Marie nodded slowly, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time since reading the letter. "Yes, that could help. And Tommy's doing well in school now." "See? We've got this." Jax reached across the table, taking her hand again. "You're a good mother, Marie. You kept him safe, even when things were at their worst. That counts for something." Tears welled up in Marie's eyes. "I can't lose him, Jax. I can't." "We won't," he said firmly, squeezing her hand. "We're a family now, and no one can take that from us." Marie met his gaze, drawing strength from his determination. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating the scattered coffee and broken mug on the floor, a reminder of how quickly their peace had been shattered. But as they sat there, hands clasped across the table, They both knew they would face this challenge like they had faced everything else, together. The courthouse loomed before them, its stone steps weathered by time and countless footsteps. Jax adjusted his tie, a foreign thing around his neck that made him feel like he was choking. Next to him, Marie smoothed down her modest blue dress, her fingers trembling slightly as they walked through the heavy wooden doors. Their lawyer, Sarah Matthews, met them in the hallway. She carried a well-worn leather briefcase and greeted them with a reassuring smile. "Remember what we discussed," she said, leading them toward the courtroom. "Stay calm, be honest, and let me handle the questioning." The courtroom felt impossibly large, with its high ceilings and dark wood panels. Their footsteps echoed as they made their way to their seats. Marie's hand found Jax's, and he could feel how cold her fingers were. He gave them a gentle squeeze. Tommy was with their neighbor, Mrs. Anderson, who had agreed to watch him during the hearing. The thought of their son, probably drawing pictures, or playing with toys, completely unaware of what was happening, made Jax's heart ache. The opposition's lawyer, Mr. Peterson, sat at the other table, arranging papers with mechanical precision. He was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who hadn't smiled once since they'd entered the room. The state's social worker sat beside him, her face professionally neutral. "All rise," the bailiff's voice boomed through the room as Judge Henderson entered. She was an older woman with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. As the proceedings began, Mr. Peterson launched into his opening statement. His words felt like physical blows to Jax as he detailed Marie's past. The homelessness, the instability, the periods of unemployment. He painted a picture of negligence and risk, making their life sound like a house of cards ready to collapse. Marie's grip tightened on Jax's hand with each accusation. He could see her jaw clenching, fighting back tears that threatened to fall. Under the table, his thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand, trying to provide what comfort he could. Their lawyer stood next, her voice clear and confident. She spoke of redemption and growth, of a mother who had done everything possible to protect her child, even in the darkest times. She talked about their current stability, their family counseling, Tommy's improved performance in school since they'd all been together. The morning crawled by in a parade of testimonies. The social worker spoke about her concerns, though she had to admit during cross-examination that Tommy showed no signs of current neglect or abuse. Their family counselor testified about their commitment to building a healthy family dynamic. When the judge called for a recess, Jax felt like he'd aged 10 years in just a few hours. They stepped out into the hallway, where Marie immediately began pacing, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "I can't do this," she whispered, wrapping her arms around herself. "The way they talked about me, they made everything sound so horrible." Jax stepped in front of her, stopping her nervous movement. He took both her hands in his, forcing her to look at him. "Hey," he said softly. "You're the strongest person I know. You kept our boy safe and healthy when you had nothing. That's not horrible. That's amazing." Marie's eyes welled with tears. "But what if it's not enough? What if they take him away?" "They won't," Jax said firmly, pulling her close. "We're his parents. We're doing everything right. The judge will see that." They stood there in the busy hallway, holding each other, drawing strength from their connection as they waited for the recess to end and their future to be decided. The heavy doors of the courtroom creaked open as people filed back in after the recess. The afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Jax helped Marie to her seat, noticing how her hands still trembled slightly. Judge Henderson settled into her chair, adjusting her reading glasses as she reviewed the papers before her. The room fell into a thick silence, broken only by the soft rustle of paper and the quiet hum of the air conditioning. After careful consideration of all testimony and evidence presented, Judge Henderson began, her voice carrying clear authority, this court finds that the best interest of the child would be served by maintaining primary custody with the mother, Marie Porter. Marie's hand shot to her mouth, stifling a sob of relief. Jax felt his chest tighten with emotion as the judge continued. Furthermore, the court grants shared custody to the father, Jax Porter, with regular visitation rights to be arranged between both parties. The judge looked directly at them over her glasses. I see two parents who, despite past difficulties, are working hard to provide a stable and loving environment for their child. The court acknowledges the progress made and expects this positive trajectory to continue. Their lawyer, Sarah, squeezed Marie's shoulder gently. Jax could hardly believe it was real. They'd won. They would stay together as a family. However, Judge Henderson added, her tone serious, this court strongly recommends continued family counseling and regular check-ins with social services for the next 6 months to ensure continued stability. She looked at both of them intently. Do you understand these terms? Yes, Your Honor, they answered in unison, their voices thick with emotion. The judge nodded, satisfied. Very well. Court is adjourned. The sharp rap of her gavel echoed through the room. Marie turned to Jax, tears streaming down her face. He pulled her into a tight embrace, not caring who saw. Their lawyer gathered her papers, smiling warmly at them. Congratulations, Sarah said, touching Marie's arm. You did well in there, both of you. They thanked her, still somewhat dazed by their victory. As they gathered, their things, even Mr. Peterson, the opposition's lawyer, gave them a small nod of acknowledgement. The walk out of the courtroom felt surreal. Their footsteps echoed off the marble floors as they made their way through the building's grand hallway. Marie's hand found Jax's, their fingers intertwining naturally. As they pushed through the heavy front doors, the afternoon sunlight hit them full force. At the bottom of the courthouse steps, Mrs. Anderson waited with Tommy, who was chasing pigeons across the sidewalk. Mommy! Daddy! Tommy called out, abandoning his game and running toward them. His face lit up with pure joy, completely unaware of how close they'd come to being separated. The boy darted ahead of them, still full of endless energy, spinning and laughing in the warm sunshine. Jax and Marie paused at the top of the steps, watching their son play. The weight of the day's events settled around them like a comfortable blanket. Marie squeezed Jax's hand. We did it, she whispered, her voice full of wonder and relief. They stood there together, bathed in sunlight, watching their son chase his shadow across the courthouse lawn. Their family was safe. They were together. And for now, that was everything. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window as Jax stood at the stove, flipping pancakes while Tommy sat at the table, swinging his legs and working on his math homework. Marie moved around the kitchen, packing lunches and occasionally helping Tommy with a difficult problem. 7 times 8? Tommy's face scrunched up in concentration. Think about it like groups, Jax said, sliding a fresh pancake onto a plate. If you have 7 groups of 8. Tommy counted on his fingers, mumbling under his breath. 56. That's my boy. Jax ruffled Tommy's hair as he set the plate of pancakes in front of him. The words came naturally now, no longer feeling strange on his tongue. These quiet morning moments had become his favorite part of the day. Marie watched them from the counter, a soft smile playing on her lips. She looked healthier now, her cheeks fuller, her eyes brighter. The shadows that had haunted her were fading, replaced by a quiet contentment that showed in the way she carried herself. After breakfast, Jax drove Tommy to school, their morning routine now as familiar as breathing. They listened to oldies radio, Tommy asking questions about the songs that Jax was more than happy to answer. At drop-off, Tommy gave him a quick hug before running to join his friends. The days fell into a comfortable pattern. Jax would work at his garage until mid-afternoon, then pick Tommy up from school. They'd spend time together while Marie attended her therapy sessions or worked at her new part-time job at the local library. Sometimes they'd work on Tommy's model airplanes. Other times they'd throw a baseball around in the backyard. Jax was teaching Tommy about engines, too, starting with the basics. Marie bloomed in her new role at the library, coming home with stories about the books she'd discovered and the people she'd met. The haunted look in her eyes had been replaced by a spark of excitement when she talked about her day. She was healing, finding her place in the world again. One evening, Marie prepared their favorite meal, her grandmother's lasagna recipe, the kitchen filled with the warm, comforting aroma of herbs and tomato sauce. Tommy helped set the table, carefully placing the forks and napkins just so, while Jax poured drinks for everyone. They settled into their seats, the familiar routine of passing dishes and serving food feeling natural and right. Tommy's face was illuminated by the soft kitchen light as he carefully cut his lasagna into neat squares, just like Marie had taught him. The conversation flowed easily, Tommy chattering about his day at school, Marie sharing a funny story about a mix-up with the library books, and Jax talking about a tricky repair job at the garage. It was ordinary and perfect, the kind of moment Jax had never known he wanted until it was right here in front of him. Tommy finished his first helping and looked up at Jax. His fork paused halfway to his mouth. His expression turned serious, contemplative in that way that children sometimes get when they're working up the courage to say something important. "Are you my dad now?" he asked, his voice small but steady, his eyes fixed on Jax's face. The kitchen fell quiet. Marie's hand found Jax's under the table, squeezing gently. Jax felt his heart swell with an emotion so big it almost hurt. Looking at his son. Jax smiled, his voice thick with emotion. "I sure am, kid." Jax stared at the stack of bills on his office desk, running his hand through his graying hair. The numbers weren't adding up the way they should. 3 major repairs had fallen through this month, and the cost of parts kept rising. The warm glow of family life at home felt far away as he faced the cold reality of his shop's finances. The bell above the shop door chimed. He looked up to see Marie walking in, carrying a brown paper bag that smelled like his favorite sandwich from the deli down the street. "Thought you could use some lunch," she said, setting the bag on his desk. Her eyes caught the scattered papers, and her smile faded. "What's wrong?" Jax pushed back from his desk, the chair creaking. "Shop's not doing so well. Parts costs are up, and I've lost some big jobs to that new franchise place across town." He rubbed his face. "I don't know how I'm going to make payroll next month." Marie pulled up a chair and sat beside him, her shoulder touching his. "Show me," she said simply. "Marie, you don't have to—" "Show me the books, Jax." Her voice was firm but gentle. 2 heads are better than 1. He slid the ledger toward her. Marie had always been good with numbers, better than him, if he was honest. She studied the pages carefully, her finger trailing down columns of figures. "Have you considered offering a loyalty program?" she asked after a while. "The library started one last month. People love feeling like they're getting something extra." Jax blinked. "A loyalty program?" "Sure." Marie grabbed a blank piece of paper. "Like after 5 oil changes, the 6th one is half off, or a discount on winter tire changes if they stored their summer tires with you." Her pen moved quickly, as she jotted down ideas. "That could work," Jax said slowly. "Most of my customers are regulars anyway." "And what about social media?" Marie continued. "Tommy could help set up a Facebook page, show before and after pictures of repairs, share maintenance tips. People love that stuff." A warmth spread through Jax's chest as he watched her work. This was the Marie he remembered from their early days. Sharp, practical, always ready with solutions. She'd lost that confidence somewhere along the way, but now it was coming back. "We could do a spring maintenance special," he added, getting caught up in her enthusiasm. "Check fluids, belts, filters, catch problems before they get big." Marie nodded, writing faster. "And partner with local businesses. The coffee shop next door could offer discounts to your customers while they wait. You could do the same for their regulars." They spent the next hour brainstorming ideas, the sandwich forgotten on the desk. Marie's practical suggestions merged with Jax's technical knowledge, creating a solid plan to bring in more business. Looking at their list, Jax felt the knot in his stomach starting to loosen. The problems weren't solved yet, but for the first time in weeks, he could see a way forward. Marie reached over and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "We've got this," she said softly. Jax squeezed her hand, feeling its warmth and strength. She was right. Together they could handle whatever came their way. The thought filled him with a deep sense of peace. In Marie, he had not just a partner in life, but someone who made him better, stronger. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window as Jax watched his son devour a bowl of cereal. The boy had grown so much in the past months, not just in height, but in confidence too. His laughter came easier now, his smiles more frequent. "Dad," the boy said between bites, "can we work on my bike today? The chain keeps slipping." Jax's heart warmed at the word, Dad. It still felt new, like a gift he wasn't sure he deserved. "Sure thing, buddy, right after breakfast." Marie moved around the kitchen, humming as she packed lunches. The domestic scene felt almost surreal to Jax. Just last week, they'd returned from their first family vacation, a simple camping trip to the lake. He remembered how the boy had squealed with delight when they caught their first fish together, how Marie's eyes sparkled in the firelight as they roasted marshmallows. But even in these peaceful moments, doubt crept in. Jax's hands, rough from years of mechanical work, bore the faded tattoos of his past life. Sometimes, when other parents at the park gave him wary looks, he felt the weight of his history pressing down on him. Later that afternoon, while fixing the boy's bike in the garage, Jax's old leather jacket caught his eye from where it hung in the corner. The patches had been removed, but he could still see their outlines, remnants of a life he'd left behind. "You're doing it again," Marie's voice came from the doorway. She walked over, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Doing what?" "Overthinking." She sat down beside him on the workbench. "I see that look in your eyes sometimes, like you're waiting for all this to disappear." Jax set down his wrench, struggling to find the words. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm good enough for him, for both of you. My past is exactly that, the past," Marie interrupted. "You know what I see? I see a man who gets up every morning and chooses to be better, who helps with homework, even, when he's tired from work, who teaches our son about respect and kindness, not through words, but through actions." Their son's bike lay between them, half repaired. Marie picked up a rag and started cleaning the chain, her movements methodical. "Remember last week at the lake, when Tommy fell in the water and got scared?" Jax nodded. The memory was vivid, the splash, the panic in the boy's eyes. "You didn't hesitate. You jumped right in, clothes and all. then spent the next hour teaching him to swim, making him laugh until he forgot to be afraid. She looked at him intently. That's who you are, Jax. Not what those tattoos say, not what your past holds. You're the man who jumps in when his family needs him. The simple truth of her words settled over him. Maybe being a good father wasn't about being perfect. Maybe it was about showing up every day, fixing broken bike chains, making pancakes on Sunday mornings, and being there when his son needed him. Marie reached over and squeezed his hand. You're exactly the father he needs, Jax, and exactly the man I always knew you could be. In that moment, surrounded by tools and motor oil, with the sound of their son playing in the yard floating through the open garage door, Jax felt something shift inside him. The weight of his past seemed lighter somehow, less important than the present he was building with his family. The autumn breeze rustled through the leaves as Jax watched his son practicing baseball in their backyard. The boy's determination showed in every swing, even when he missed. After each attempt, he'd look to Jax for guidance, his eyes bright with trust. "Keep your eye on the ball, buddy," Jax called out, his voice gentle. "And remember to follow through with your swing." The boy nodded, his face scrunching up in concentration. When the next pitch connected with a satisfying crack, his face lit up with joy. "Did you see that, Dad? Did you see how far it went?" "Sure did. That was a great hit." Jax's chest swelled with pride. These moments, these simple exchanges, had become the highlight of his days. The word Dad no longer felt foreign on his ears. It had become a badge of honor he wore with increasing confidence. Inside the house, Marie worked on decorations for tomorrow's birthday party. She'd spread streamers and balloons across the living room, humming softly to herself. The sight of her, peaceful and content, made Jax's heart ache with gratitude. The shadows that once haunted her eyes had begun to fade, replaced by a quiet joy that grew stronger each day. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table, the boy couldn't contain his excitement about tomorrow's celebration. "Will there be chocolate cake?" he asked, practically bouncing in his chair. "With extra frosting," Marie promised, ruffling his hair, "just the way you like it." "And guess what else?" Jax added, sharing a knowing look with Marie. "We got you something special this year." The boy's eyes widened. "What is it?" "You'll have to wait until tomorrow," Jax chuckled, enjoying the anticipation on his son's face. Later that night, after tucking the boy into bed, Jax found Marie in the kitchen, putting final touches on the birthday cake. She'd outdone herself, creating a masterpiece decorated with racing cars, their son's latest obsession. "He's growing up so fast," Marie said softly, carefully adding another tiny car to the frosting. "Sometimes I look at him and can hardly believe how far we've come." Jax wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Remember when he wouldn't even look me in the eye? Now I can't get him to stop talking about baseball and cars." Marie leaned back against him, her hands covered in frosting. "You've given him something he never had before. A father who shows up, who listens, who cares." The next morning, their home filled with the sounds of celebration. The boy's face glowed as he opened his presents, saving the special one from his parents for last. When he unveiled the junior mechanic's tool set, complete with his own work apron, his eyes sparkled with delight. "Now you can help me in the garage," Jax said, watching as his son immediately put on the apron, practically swimming in it. "Really? You'll teach me everything?" "Everything I know," Jax promised, his voice thick with emotion. The day unfolded in a blur of games, cake, and laughter. Friends from school came and went, filling their home with the kind of joy Jax had never thought possible in his old life. He watched as his son showed off his new tools, as Marie captured every moment with her camera, as their house transformed into something more than just walls and a roof. It became a home filled with love. The gravel crunched under the tires as Jax pulled his truck into the familiar clearing. The old oak tree still stood tall against the evening sky, its branches spreading wide like welcoming arms. This spot, tucked away from the bustling town, held years of memories for them both. Marie's hand rested on the door handle, her eyes taking in the unchanged landscape. "I can't believe it's still here," she said softly. "Remember how we used to spend hours just sitting under that tree?" Jax nodded, killing the engine. The silence that fell between them was comfortable now, unlike the tense quiet they'd endured in those first days after she'd returned. He stepped out of the truck and walked around to open her door, a gesture that made her smile. Together they walked toward the oak tree. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, casting long shadows across the ground. The old wooden bench they'd carved their initials into years ago still sat beneath the tree's sprawling canopy, weathered but standing strong. "Look," Marie said, running her fingers over the faded JP plus MP etched into the wood. "We were so young then, weren't we? Thought we had everything figured out." Jack sat beside her, their shoulders touching. "We didn't know anything back then," he admitted. "But maybe we had to go through all of that to get here." The gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers, just like it used to. Marie leaned her head against his shoulder, her voice thoughtful. "When I was living on the streets, I used to think about this place, about you. I was so ashamed of what I'd become." "Hey," Jack said, taking her hand in his. "That's behind us now. Look at where we are. Our boy's growing up strong and happy. The shop's doing well. We're together." Marie squeezed his hand. "You could have turned me away that day at the diner. Nobody would have blamed you." "Never crossed my mind," Jax replied, his voice gruff with emotion. "Even after everything, seeing you there, I just knew I had to help." They sat in companionable silence, watching the sun sink lower on the horizon. The old oak's leaves rustled above them, a sound that had once been the backdrop to their young love. Now it witnessed their older, wiser hearts finding their way back to each other. "Our son asked me yesterday if we were going to stay together forever," Marie said, a small smile playing on her lips. "He worries sometimes, you know?" Jax nodded, understanding. "We'll show him. Every day we'll show him what it means to build something that lasts." The twilight deepened around them, and a cool evening breeze picked up. Marie shivered slightly, and Jax wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her closer. The moment felt right, peaceful in a way their past never had been. Standing up, Jax offered his hand to Marie. "We should head back before it gets too dark." They walked hand in hand back to the truck, their footsteps in sync. At the car, Marie paused, looking up at Jax with eyes that held both memories of their past and hope for their future. "I never imagined it would end up like this, but I'm so grateful," she said softly. Jax smiled and nodded. "Me too." The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows as Jax flipped pancakes at the stove. The familiar sizzle of butter and the sweet aroma of maple syrup filled their home. Marie stood beside him, preparing lunches for the day ahead, while their son sat at the table, nose buried in a comic book. "Don't forget we've got that parent-teacher conference this afternoon," Marie reminded him, spreading peanut butter on wheat bread. Jax nodded, sliding a perfectly golden pancake onto a plate. "Already cleared my schedule at the shop." He glanced at their son with a proud smile. "Teacher says he's doing real well in math." Their morning routine had become a comfortable dance. After years of uncertainty and struggle, they'd found their rhythm. The house that once felt too big for just Jack's now buzzed with life and laughter. Family photos lined the walls, homework assignments hung on the fridge, and scattered toys in the living room told the story of their shared life. Marie moved around the kitchen with confidence now, so different from the hesitant woman who'd first returned to Jax's life. She'd found work as a receptionist at a local clinic, her natural warmth making her perfect for the job. The shadows that once haunted her eyes had faded, replaced by a steady contentment. "Dad," their son called from the table. "Can you help me with my bike after school? The chain keeps slipping." "Sure thing, buddy," Jax replied, his heart warming at the word Dad. It still amazed him how natural it felt now, being a father. The fear of not being good enough had gradually given way to a deep, unwavering love. After breakfast, they moved through their morning routine with practiced ease. Teeth brushed, backpack checked, lunch packed. Marie kissed their son goodbye before heading to work, while Jax drove him to school. At the shop, Jax worked steadily through the morning, his hands sure and capable as they fixed engines and replaced parts. The familiar smell of motor oil and metal grounded him, reminding him of how far he'd come from his days in the gang. His customers trusted him now, respected him as a businessman and family man. The parent-teacher conference went well, their son's teacher praising his progress and attitude. Walking home afterward, the three of them stopped for ice cream, celebrating the good report. Their son skipped ahead, cone in hand, while Jax and Marie followed at a slower pace, their fingers intertwined. As evening approached, they gathered on their front porch, a habit they'd developed over time. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, casting long shadows across their yard. Their son sat between them on the porch swing, the gentle back-and-forth motion soothing and familiar. "Dad," he said suddenly, looking up at Jax with curious eyes. "Tommy at school said you used to be in a motorcycle gang. Is that true?" Jax exchanged a glance with Marie, who nodded encouragingly. He'd known this question would come eventually. Taking a deep breath, he looked at his son's earnest face. "Yes, it's true," he said carefully. "I made some mistakes when I was younger, got mixed up with the wrong crowd. But I learned from those mistakes, worked hard to change my life." The boy considered this, his young face serious. "Were you scared to change?" "Sometimes," Jax admitted. "Change isn't always easy, but meeting your mom and later finding out about you, that made everything worth it." He wrapped an arm around his son's shoulders. "No matter where we come from," he said gently, "what matters is where we're going." The next morning dawned bright and clear, full of promise. Jack stood at his kitchen window, coffee mug in hand, watching the sun climb over the horizon. The familiar sounds of Marie getting their son ready for school filled the house. The gentle reminders about brushing teeth, the rustle of papers being stuffed into a backpack, the playful banter between mother and child. He smiled, remembering how empty and quiet this house used to be. Now it was alive with the warmth of family, the walls holding memories of laughter and love instead of loneliness. The changes in his life still amazed him sometimes. Marie appeared beside him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, resting her head against his shoulder. "Just thinking about how different everything is now," he replied, pulling her closer. "How good it all turned out." Their son bounded into the kitchen, backpack slung over one shoulder. "Mom, Dad, can we have pizza tonight?" "It's not even breakfast time yet, kiddo," Jax chuckled, ruffling the boy's hair. "Never too early to plan for pizza," their son declared, with the wisdom only a child could muster. After breakfast, Marie headed to work at the clinic while Jax drove their son to school. The morning routine felt natural now, comfortable like a well-worn leather jacket. No more awkward silences or uncertain glances. They'd found their rhythm as a family. At the shop, Jax worked through his morning appointments with a lighter heart than he'd had in years. The weight of his past no longer pressed down on him like it used to. He'd made peace with who he was and who he'd become. That afternoon, he closed the shop early and headed home. The spring weather was perfect. Warm sunshine, gentle breeze, birds singing in the trees. Their son was already in the backyard when he arrived, kicking a soccer ball against the fence. Marie joined them outside after finishing her shift at the clinic. She looked relaxed, happy. The haunted look that used to shadow her eyes was gone, replaced by quiet contentment. She'd found her own peace, working through her past struggles with determination and grace. Their son ran circles around them, showing off his soccer moves and chattering about his day at school. The simple joy of watching him play, of being there for these everyday moments, filled Jax's heart to bursting. This was what family meant, not just being there for the big moments, but for all the small ones in between. The afternoon light turned golden as the sun began its descent. Their son chased fireflies across the yard, his laughter echoing through the air. Marie sat beside Jax on the porch steps, their shoulders touching. The moment felt perfect in its simplicity. Looking at his son running through the yard, joy evident in every movement, Jax felt a deep sense of gratitude wash over him. He turned to Marie, taking her hand in his. Everything they'd been through, the pain, the separation, the struggles, had led them here, to this peaceful moment. "We've got this," he said with a smile, squeezing her hand gently. "Together, we've got everything we need. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day."